Hi everyone. I'm going to summarize chapter 1 and 2 of the book Hold On to Your Kids by Gordon Neufeld. This is my copy. It's an older version. There's a new one available too now that has an additional chapter about technology. So in our group today, we talked about how children have changed since when you were a child, and some of the things we came up with in our group was that it's different for parents now because of technology, for one thing, and just it's such an information age. You're getting bombarded with a lot of information, which sometimes is good, but it can also be really overwhelming and confusing, especially because some of the information is conflicting. So that can be anxiety provoking for you, and kids pick up on your anxiety, and then they're feeling anxious if you're feeling anxious because they want you to be in charge and know what you're doing, or pretend to. Of course, you don't always know, and you're not always going to be perfect, and that's fine. But yeah, but for the most part, is they want you to be in charge and to be guiding them. So Gordon Neufeld talks a lot about attachment, attachment in a physical and emotional way. One of the ways you foster attachment is if your child is upset, you're there for them. You help them out. When they're an infant, you pick them up when they're crying. When they're older, you just see what's happening. Be empathetic and be there for them. And so a healthy attachment is basically you're like a mama duck and the baby ducks are following you. It's also, Gordon Neufeld compares it to a magnet where, you attach on the one side and then there is a repulsion on the other side. So he talks about peer attachment, and so this sometimes happens when children get older. It's of course totally fine for kids to have friends. They should have friends. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes peers replace parents in the attachment, and that's not a good thing. It's not a natural thing. Kids need their parents to be in charge and to be showing them the way, not their peers. And when the attachment flips, like the magnet flips, then they're attached to the peers, and it's like they're rejecting you. Everything you believe in is suddenly stupid, and they might be mocking you or ignoring you or talking to you in a mean kind of way or whatever. And not that that doesn't happen in healthy relationships sometimes too, because we all have our moments. It's never going to be perfect. Parenting is not like all like roses and sunshine and rainbows or whatever. We get grumpy, and sometimes we're overwhelmed or we're hungry or we're tired or whatever. I mean, none of us are perfect. That's fine. But if it's like an ongoing thing where your child is like, just, it seems like you can't get through to them anymore, then the issue might be peer attachment, and then you can work on changing that. It's never too late, even if they're older. And we get more and more into that with the following chapters. But so one of the things in the book that they say is that it's not just the things that, attachment the way it should be, the way it should look. It's also sometimes what's happening is the problem is what's missing, because in a relationship with a parent, what you really, really need is unconditional love and acceptance. The ability to, like the desire to nurture, the ability to extend yourself for the sake of your child, like, and the willingness to sacrifice for the growth and development of the other. You know how as a parent you feel like you'd move mountains for them? Yeah, that's what you want. Now if they are attached to peers, are peers going to want to do that? Probably not, right? So so if they're attached to peers, there's going to be important stuff missing. If they're attached, like as a primary attachment, I should say again, normal attachments, like all of us have multiple attachments, and that's fine as long as they take their guidance from you. So something you can think about is what some of your values are for parenting, what's important, and one of the things he talks about as well in chapter 1 is people often say to him, aren't kids meant to let go and, turn away from us as they get older? And yes, they are. Once they can be independent, be their own person, not to turn to peers to guide, for the peers to guide them, because a lot of hurt feelings and bad things can come out of that, like bullying and sometimes even suicide. So, because if you open your heart to your peers, then they can also hurt you. But if you have a strong attachment to your parents, they can never hurt you in the same extent, because you're loved and you're okay, because your primary attachment is intact. And the good news is you can always reestablish a strong relationship with your child. Alrighty, that was chapter 1. In chapter 2, he starts out with an example of a child who's very rude, who's secretive, who's hostile with her parents, who can barely make eye contact. And the parents tried things like sanctions, grounding, and timeout. And that led to bigger difficulties. So they were at their wits' end, didn't know what to do, came to see Gordon Neufeld. And maybe think about, like different tactics that your parents tried on you and how they made you feel. Sometimes the tactics, they work on a short-term basis as to, like, get you to stop doing what you were doing. But in a long-term way, when you think about your values and, and the kind of relationship you want with your child, you might parent quite differently with that in mind. So imagine like this kind of scenario of this kind of hostility that the child was feeling and the things the parent tried. Like, imagine if your partner is like hostile towards you suddenly and doesn't make eye contact with you anymore and avoids you, and you call up your friends. Like, what would they recommend? Would they recommend time out with your partner, or punishing him or her? And all those tactics that we use on kids, and we think they work because they kind of work in the short term, like we wouldn't use them on other people. And if you told your friend how your partner is acting that way, your friend might think, what's happening here? Is your partner having an affair, maybe? And this is kind of what's happening with the children who've become peer oriented. It is like they've fallen out of relationship with you and fallen into a relationship with somebody else, the peers, and now they're rejecting you. And, just like in a relationship, if you've fallen out of love and in love with somebody else, then suddenly your partner that seemed great before seems like horrible and completely unappealing, because it's like that magnet again. So then Gordon Neufeld explains the different ways of attaching. So the most basic way is through the senses. It starts in infancy, where we hold them. It's very physical. It's through smell, sight, sound, or touch. It starts in infancy, but this continues on, and it's just the most basic form of attaching. Like sometimes when you love somebody, first you want to wear their sweater, they smell so good, it's just really appealing, and then when you fall out of love, it's like they stink, get away from me. This is like the basic form of attaching. Then the next one is sameness. So usually you notice that in toddlerhood, that they want to be just like you. They copy you. They want to look like you. They want to dress like you. If you are an older sibling, you might remember your little sibling wanting to be like you, following you around, copying you. It's very annoying, but it's a compliment, right? It means they love you. They want to be like you. This is important for learning language and transmitting culture. Gordon Neufeld says our vocabulary has diminished significantly since World War II, when peer attachment started to happen more and more. I guess due to parents being preoccupied with other things. Um, yeah, so our vocabulary has become very simplistic in lots of ways, and that's because vocabulary is supposed to come from our parents, not from our peers. So the next one is belonging and loyalty. It also starts in toddlerhood, wanting to lay claim to whoever the child loves and is attached to, kind of like often wanting to marry mom or dad. You know, it's like feeling very like, "Ah, you're mine." The next level of attachment is significance. You want the approval of the person that they're attached to, and that's very important. They want your eyes to light up in their presence. We usually do this automatically with little kids. We just get so excited when they show us something. If we haven't seen them in a bit, we're so excited to see them again. Even though with teenagers, sometimes you feel like they don't care anymore, like they still want you to be excited about them. They do. And then the next one is feeling. Emotion is always involved in attachment to find emotional intimacy. A child who experiences emotional intimacy with the parent can tolerate much more physical separation and still hold the parent close. So, I mean, you know, all babies go through separation anxiety. That's totally normal. But for older kids, when they're in school, for instance, if there's a really strong attachment, I mean, they might have a hard time separating, but they can still know that you love them even when you're not there with them. It's a little more risky. Like if attaching through the senses is the first and primitive way to attaching, it's like the short arm of attachment. Love is the long arm of attachment. To give your heart away is risky because it can get broken. So some people never develop the capacity to be emotionally open and vulnerable, usually due to early perceptions of rejection and abandonment. So those who have loved and suffered suffered hurt may retreat to less vulnerable modes of attachment. Vulnerability is something peer-oriented children seek to escape. So peer-oriented kids often say, I don't care, because they try to avoid being vulnerable, because you don't want to open your heart to people that you know, that are peers that you can't trust in the same way that you should be able to trust parents. And then the next one is being known. That's true psychological intimacy. To share yourself with another and then be misunderstood or rejected is for many a risk not worth taking. As a result, it's the rarest form of intimacy. There's no closeness that can surpass the sense of feeling known and still being liked and accepted, and welcomed, invited to exist just the way you are. Children who are well attached to their parents are often made fun of by their peer attached friends who don't understand why they would share so much with their parents. So, but that's a good thing. That's what you hope will happen. The less mature the child, the more primitive the ways of attaching. That's why for some teenagers or even adults, looking the same is really important, because it's a more basic way of attaching. So children who are peer attached are often hostile towards their parents. Imitation is like wanting to be like somebody is a good way of attaching. The opposite of that is mocking or ignoring. Because like we talked about with the magnet, it's like if it's flipped, then instead of wanting to be like you, they're like, oh, I don't want to be like you at all. So when an infant is little and you're holding them in your arms and you're very attached, and some stranger comes along, often they kind of turn towards you. That's normal. They're not attached to that other person, so that the other person feels more threatening. So try to have empathy around those kind of things, even if it's sometimes embarrassing, because they might do that to grandma or even dad or somebody. And it's just normal development. Keep that in mind, and maybe educate the other person that this is they're very strongly attached to you right now. They got to win them over. The other person has to win them over. Um, and yeah, and like try not to force them into like kissing people against their will and stuff, because it's good to have that attachment and to know who your people are, and be a little bit cautious with others. Um, yeah, and that's pretty much all we talked about. And something you can do is take good care of yourself, in order to be able to be nurturing for your kids, be there for them, and spend some time together that you both enjoy. I know right now it's a challenging time. If you are having challenges, let me know. Send me a private message and we can talk. And yeah, and think about your values and the long-term kind of parenting goals that you have. And yeah, hang in there. I know it's a big journey, but you can do it. Okay, see you next week.